So my name's Lila. Thank you for the introduction. I go to Colorado College. I'm originally from New York City, and I'm a sociology major and a race and ethnic studies minor. And I've never been to Chicago, so I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me. So just to start off, I had read a bit about sort of what it meant to be a woman in the modern day, and really in the last 5 years. I was looking at some research before I went to India. And I discovered upon this research that had just come out about love marriages. And the indicators quantitatively were that women were feeling more confidence in their relationships with love marriages. There were some other issues, but really that was sort of the main thing that was coming out of it. So when I went to India, I knew I wanted to study some part of this. And in the first week, there was something that I kept on noticing over and over again. And I had a 23-year-old host sister. And when we would hang out and she would be with her friends, there was one thing that was always in common, and that was that they had their cell phone in their hand, and that they all had these boyfriends, and they were defining boyfriends in this really interesting sense, where their families sort of maybe knew about it, not necessarily. They didn't spend a lot of face-to-face time with their boyfriends, but they were constantly throwing around this idea of love. I'm so in love. I love my boyfriend. But in this sort of very non-traditional sense is how we think of it, and very much so a non-traditional sense of how Indians think about it. So these are the three women who inspired this whole thing. And so when I went to the literature, there was nothing about this. The first thing that I found, and we'll get to this, is that India has the highest rate of WhatsApp users in the world. And so when I found that, I was like, of course. I mean, these girls are on WhatsApp all day. It wasn't surprising at all. So then I went to the literature and I tried to look around, and there was nothing. There was like a 2-paragraph article out of Kenya about something that was maybe a little teetering on women in communication. So I decided to bridge a bunch of different things to sort of come up with a literature review that could maybe explain why this is happening. So being a female is closely interwoven with religion, tradition, and cultural norms. 80% of the population of India identifies as a Hindu. So the Hindu governances of what it means to be a female are so interwoven with society that they are society. There's sort of no differentiation between being a woman and being a Hindu. It's sort of one and the same, even, I would argue, if you identify as a Christian, which is what about 9%, or the next biggest majority does. And then there's this idea of the public sphere and the private sphere in India. And living with a host family, this was apparent from day one. When women are in the private sphere at home, they're supposed to be robust. They're supposed to clean the house 4 times a day in between prayers, and really sort of be the home runner in that taking care of the children and the husband, and really with a quiet voice. And then in the public sphere, which was which was being docile. When you go out to meet with someone, you're not supposed to talk. You're supposed to remain quiet, and not supposed to have communication with male. And then finally, the most interesting one was that the natal home is temporary. So women are supposed to move out of their home when they get married. It's really looked down upon to remain in close contact with your natal family once you get married. And then, so the next thing I moved on to in my literature review was the idea of the middle class. So India has a rapidly growing middle class. It's regarded as the cultural vanguard, so we know that India has a trickle-down society in terms of culture. And the middle class is continuing to value education, which is causing further stratification with wealth. So next is development. Before I ever went to India, someone told me that there are more adolescents in India than there are people in the USA, which is true. And it's very obvious if you walk down the street. Everyone is young. So as these influx of the rapidly growing middle class move into urban areas, they're looking for jobs and education. They themselves are becoming more robust. And then the literature sort of mirrors this, in that the communication between couples and female agency remains low, with young women identifying as exerting little agency with their partner. And finally, media. So So 86 million Indians use the internet from their mobile device. 50 million Indians are active on WhatsApp each month. And it's obvious. You meet someone, they ask for your WhatsApp number. And WhatsApp value reach in India is 76%, with the majority of that being women. So then I moved to both qualitative and quantitative data. And my qualitative data came from 3 professors at the University of Pune. And when I first moved to this, I didn't really know what I was going to find. But you'll see I found this really interesting divide between the qualitative data with professors who I would say age from 40 to 60, and my quantitative data, which was with young women ages 18 to 25. So I had interviewed a professor of media studies, and she really teetered this line that it wasn't about women. It was about both men and women, and it was about this relationship that they were able to have. And she really asserted that social media was changing communication norms. I interviewed a very opinionated professor of sociology. And this is a great quote that she said: "A certain type of cultural schizophrenia is happening in the neoliberal contemporary context. It's very much so alive and highlighted in India, in my opinion. These young women would act in certain circumstances which is not controllable for their brothers and fathers. But when it comes to serious issues such as long-term friendships or marriage, then they would turn back to tradition, family, caste, and so on." I was really disappointed when I heard this, because to me this was so alive and well, and she, and we'll come to another quote of hers, she just really didn't see it. She didn't think that social media would have any impact. And to me, on the street, it has to have an impact. Because if people have so much communication and information at their fingertips, how could it not? And then finally, a professor of feminist and gender studies, who I found to sort of be most liberal on the topic. And she said, firstly, young people have the power to reach out to those not in their immediate circle. That has opened up interesting possibilities of romance and intimacy. Specifically, whom you can romance, it produces certain kinds of autonomous spaces for expression which might not have been so accessible. So she introduced this idea to me of an autonomous space, which is women could communicate freely and could communicate with ideas of confidence. So then I moved to some quantitative data, and just I sort of had quantitative measures, but my qualitative responses in the survey ended up being more fruitful. So here's some of the common responses. I found that women were really complimentary of social media and the experiences it had and the autonomy that it had afforded them. And a lot of them noted that they keep their interactions private from family members, which is interesting, as that was sort of what I was wondering, if this sphere was so privately guarded by male family members having premarital communications, did they keep it secret? And most did. And then sort of to transpose this with my qualitative response from the robust professor of sociology: if your life is fraught with inequalities of various kinds all the time, and there's that apparent feeling of freedom in terms of a cell phone, that is not going to change your expression. So that's pretty hard, that a professor doesn't see this as changing, and sort of the women were transposing it by really seeing this as providing them an autonomous space. And so finally, there were 3 things I asserted from my research. The first was that India already has a heavy emphasis on social ties. Their society is entwined with them. People want to be part of groups, of communities, and so this was part of it. It was an access to information, and so women noted that they were able to get their hands on information at their fingertips that they weren't able to before. And then the idea of female transience. And so if females don't have a sense of belonging within their natal home, they were looking for other realms to affirm their belonging, and possibly that was with social media, and as they seek autonomous spaces. So I couldn't come to any firm conclusions, obviously, since I didn't feel like this research was sort of broad enough to assert anything, but there was positive data to suggest that social media communication outlets in India are providing new experiences for women.